Welcome to the KIX EAP Podcast, your monthly podcast with important leaders in education from Eastern Europe, Middle East and North Africa, Central Asia, and the Asia Pacific. I'm your host, Ryan Allen, assistant professor at Chapman University here in Southern California, and my own background is in international and comparative education. Let's start the show. Today we have Dr. Bal Chandra Luitel, professor at Kathmandu University School of Education. Dr. Luitel works with math teachers and other educators to develop transformative educational practices. We talk about his start in the math field, his interdisciplinary approach and research, and the barriers faced by his students in Nepal. Let's jump to the interview. Dr. Luitel, thank you for joining us today on the podcast. If we could, maybe just jump back to your early days. How did you get into math and teaching? You're a math teacher by training. What was sort of the inspiration there?
Thank you, Ryan, for the question, and thank you for having me in your podcast. Actually, when I remember my school days, especially in primary school, I was not very good at math. I have been a language person, since my schooling, and I would like stories, poems, and all sorts of those genre, apart from, outside of STEM genre. It was my grade 6th, I think my grade 6, when I was, I would say around 10, 11 years old. My eldest brother, who is no more, was a school teacher. And he was very good at math, actually. He could not study beyond matriculation because of the condition in our family. He had to provide, he had to look after, because we were 8 in numbers, actually, 4 sons and 4 daughters. And we are basically, from farming background. So my eldest brother was a teacher in a local school, and he was worried somehow. That's how I felt, about my performance in mathematics. So I think it was about decimal, percentage, ratio, proportion, these mathematical concepts. And I was really struggling about the learning of these different concepts. One of the problems for me was that I could not see the connection across these concepts. And my brother actually explained to me the relationship between decimal and percentage and ratio. And that's how I started liking mathematics. And I could see the connections. And gradually, when I was in grade 7, I was able to solve problems of grade 10 level. Okay, so that's how, I think that was the moment that I could see the connection across mathematics. So that was very helpful for me. And then I improved after grade 6. I improved mathematics, and then I could actually help my friends inside the classroom. After my matriculation, after my grade 10, because at that time, in my time, back in 1990s, the school would end at grade 10, and then we would go to the university. So at the university, I chose mathematics, and I chose education faculty. There are a number of reasons why I chose education faculty. Actually, initially I opted science faculty but that was very far from my place. One reason. Reason number 2, it was a time of, this movement, people's movement for multi-party democracy. So I felt, my family felt that it is unsafe to send far from our place. So I opted for education faculty, and I chose mathematics as the major. And then I didn't have a big dream when I was doing mathematics at my certificate level. All I wanted was a school teacher because I saw the scarcity of math teachers. So I wanted to go back to my school and I would be a math teacher. So I developed passion to become a teacher. So I started, doing mathematics, doing mathematical problem, and I was good at problem solving. In my university, in my certificate level of study, we didn't have qualified teachers as well. They were just bachelor's pass. They didn't have master's degree. So we struggled actually to a great extent because they wouldn't know mathematics that well. So we try to, consult other persons. We try to consult persons outside of our university. So we started that way. And I was a little bit bright, academically bright, and I would help my friends to learn mathematics, to excel mathematics. And in the meantime, I started tutoring. Started home tuition, and then I taught private tutoring, and then I taught many kids around my place, and then that also helped me develop confidence in mathematics. So in bachelor's, I did the same actually. I excelled in mathematical contents, and I was not very much good at pedagogical side though, although I chose mathematics faculty, and that continued until my master's. And in the meantime, I taught in several schools. I ran private tutoring sessions, and that's how I established myself as a math teacher.
Mhm. I think it's great to hear. So many stories start out with an inspiration from a family member, whether it's a brother or like myself with my mother. I mean, it's just you see those so often. So thanks for sharing that. But I think about the next step that I'm kind of curious to hear about. We can read your website and read some of your work, and we'll share it in our show notes. But I'm curious how you went from, or maybe the maturation of going from, a teacher and sort of getting into the field to this transformative paradigm that you talk about, and maybe explain like what is that to our listeners that might be unfamiliar, and why is it important to Paul?
Thank you very much, Ryan. Actually, I was explaining about my passion into mathematics and mathematics education. And then in my first master's degree in Nepal, I excelled very well in mathematical content such as real analysis, algebra, topology, so on and so forth. What fascinated me about the depth of the concept, for example, infinity, I was so much engaged in developing model because students wouldn't understand infinity. So I developed some models like that were more conceptual and philosophical models, and we presented that as the partial requirements in one of our mathematics mathematics education course, and that actually helped. And that I felt that I'm not just in mathematics. I'm trying to understand mathematics more philosophically, more meaningfully. It's not just the content. It is not just the problem solving, algorithmic problem solving. I would like to go in deep. I was sort of, at that time, I was also very much oriented toward more Marxist philosophy. And in one of the paper, I wrote a parallel between mathematics and Marxism. That was when I was doing masters. It was all maverick kind of idea anyway, but I didn't pursue that further. But that was my background actually. Grew up as in a very spiritual family, and influenced by some form, these forms of alternative, or I would say resistant politics, because Nepal was absolute monarchy during my school time, and then we were against of that kind of rule. And during the multi-party system, that also influenced, not as a political activist, but as a teacher, as an educator. So that pursuit led me to this transformative learning actually. When I was doing my second master's at Chapman University, I met Professor Peter Taylor as my mentor in 2002. And then I gradually started thinking because, one of the coursework that I did was curriculum theory. And in that, we had to study Habermas. And then this Habermasian idea, when I actually read Habermasian idea initially, I felt that this is very much about myself, about my practice. Because Habermas would talk about, more emancipatory, practical and emancipatory, where we would make our, discourse people friendly, more communicative. But what I was taught earlier that mathematics is for a select few, and Habermas challenged that. I would say through Habermasian idea, I was able to challenge that. So it's not just mathematics for a select few, but mathematics and science should be for all if you are to talk about school education. So that actually set my thinking. It was back in 2002. Because of my background, somewhat, background as an activist during my school education, and then gradually as a left-leaning educator, more left-leaning, and I found my voice when I went through Habermas for the first time. And then I read Freire, that was also very, very helpful. And also I went through philosophies, Eastern and Western philosophies, and especially Buddhism and Vedanta in Hinduism and also Jainism, the libertarian perspective of Eastern wisdom tradition helped me to understand myself as an educator and also as a person, as a citizen of Nepal and beyond. So learning is not just about, acquiring knowledge. It's not just about knowledge acquisition. It's not just about, developing some skills, discrete skills, but it is about questioning ourselves, questioning our beliefs, values, assumptions. So that's how I convinced myself that this is a way to go if we are to promote better math learning, better science learning. So that actually, this is how I came to transformative learning. And the other thing is that, with my, colleague, mentor, and my supervisor, Professor Peter Taylor, we actually started in our classroom, we would use critical self-reflection as a pedagogical tool. And that was another defining moment that how we could actually implement transformative learning into our own practice. How can I see my weaknesses? How can I see my weaknesses and that weaknesses is reproduced through this system? Because myself is not an individual as well. While I'm an individual, but this individuality has been shaped by many forces, the systemic forces, seen and unseen forces. So that actually helped me to practice the philosophical side of emancipatory interest of Habermas. So this is how I came to transformative learning.
Yeah, one thing that struck me by what you just said, but then also looking at some of your work is how you brought over things from east to west, also cross-disciplinary from cultural studies, different educational philosophies. And then also what I find interesting is you're studying mathematics and you're working in the world of mathematics. And I think a lot of us might expect maybe a quantitative researcher to connect there, but you're bringing over a paradigm of qualitative research and ethnography, autoethnography. Can you maybe talk about some of those tensions or what maybe draws you more to that field of study or some of the barriers that you're sort of you're breaking the mold, I think, in a lot of ways.
Sure. Thank you, Ryan. This is a very, very important question, and I wish that if somebody gives me the chance to respond to this question on a daily basis. Because the reason is that when I was doing my master's, back in 2003, I wrote the thesis, a research project, I would say, and that was something I would imagine when I was in class grade 9 and 10. I went to I grew up in a very rural setting. There were no transportation facilities during my school time, apart from our one local means, and they were not available for all as well. For example, us, just horses, they were not available to us. So all we depended was on our one manual labor. But I was very much fascinated by the nature that we encounter on a daily basis in that rural setting. And I was, as I said to you, apart from my excellence in mathematics in my school education, I was equally good at language-related subjects. For example, Nepali, that would be taught, that was the medium of instruction, but English was also taught as a separate subject. And I would excel in both. I mean, I was really good at both. And thanks to my teachers who actually helped me read more and more. I would read great books in Nepal, written by literary persons. But that went in vain during my higher education in Nepal. My certificate, bachelor and master's, I never encountered that kind of work because it was all about mathematics. And that mathematics was very dry. Okay? So I was always looking for the connection between this human side of our being and becoming and the nature of mathematics that we encounter. And thankfully, during my master's, when I talked to my supervisor, mentor, and colleague, Professor Peter Taylor, and said, no, there are a lot about mathematics. It's not just math education, but mathematics. And and then he lent me some book, and then I started studying, the book on the philosophy of mathematics by Paul Ernst and other classic writers as well. And that was so amazing for me because there were different nature of mathematics, dialogical nature of mathematics, fallibilistic nature of mathematics. And that actually attracted me in the second day. And then I started sharing my research ideas. So this is what I wanted. Actually, I wanted to do more philosophical inquiry. And Peter asked me to write a narrative of what I think about mathematics. I wrote something. I forgot what I wrote, but I wrote something in a very subjective manner, in a very, very much narrative style. And I said, no, you should not be doing philosophical inquiry in a conventional sense. This will be all objective, and you have to consume others' ideas. I think you do more of narrative. Do write narrative about mathematics, how you feel about mathematics. And then in this process, I started writing. I was so captivated by that writing style because I started reading Max van Manen, the scholar in the field of hermeneutic phenomenology. Then I started reading, Zoni Saldana and other, famous authors who would write about, narrative, ethnography, and not the old form of ethnography. They would say new ethnography. And that would blend literary genre with the social science genre. Then my project actually developed out of this new cultivated interest. The first year in 2002, I was very much influenced by Freire, Jacques Méziroux, and critical math education group. And second year in 2003, I was very much influenced by all sorts of ideas, the methodological ideas, hermeneutic phenomenology. And I started reading Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and this, Lacan, and so on and so forth. So that opened up, new kind of world. And then my project developed, now I felt that, these meta narratives, grand narratives are not very much helpful. So I need to start from myself. So I would say, back in 2003, I was extremely postmodernist. I would fight with every mathematics educator, science educator who would confront with me at that time. So I was very much informed about postmodernism. So my master's project grew out of that, legacy. And I wrote something like, my curricular journey, and I didn't write a research question. I didn't have a research question. I had in my proposal, but in thesis, in project report, I didn't write. And my supervisor was so helpful. And then he said, yes, whatever you would like to do, you have to justify. And I came up my research question toward the end of my project. So that project is also available on the website. And that was the beginning of my scholarly thinking in transformative learning. At that time, I didn't say transformative learning, because what happened, my first year, I still found that, Mejiro and Freire somewhat grand, the proponent of grand narratives. So I sort of use more of a postmodernist frame. And that was quite fascinating. That liberated me. That liberated in many ways, that I would argue, 2 plus 2 can be 5, can be 10. Because if you have 0, 1, 2, 3, just these numbers, then 2 plus 2 would be 10. Because there won't be 4. So I developed this kind of argument. And I started looking into the multiplicities within mathematics. So I started reading more about mathematics as not something given, but that which can be constructed, developed. So what happened if mathematics was developed differently? What would happen if mathematics was developed as per Lobachevsky, not as per the Euclid? So I would start think that way. That gave me a new space. And after my master's, I came back to Nepal, and I developed a master's program with the help of other teacher educators. And in the meantime, I became a little bit soft. I was very much critical of one form of mathematics. I would even challenge them. But, I developed some pragmatic ground, and I got a scholarship back in 2006. And I had plenty of experience in the field. I developed a master's program, and I went again for PhD. And during my PhD proposal, a concept when I was developing concept note, I again talked to Peter Taylor. And then he said, yeah, something you are very interested in philosophy, but you might think of small p philosophy. Not capital P philosophy, small p philosophy. And then he said, I'm very much interested in cultural studies, and your master's project is also very much driven by that kind of thing. You might look into that one. And then I was also very much interested, because we wrote a paper. By then, we wrote a paper on, that was published in 2007, but the genesis of that paper goes back to 2004. And that was about the Sonai and pseudosphere, published by Cultural Studies of Science Education. And that Sonai is a Nepali musical instrument. And then my argument was that actually resembles pseudosphere, which is not a sphere, but it is a pseudosphere. So that pseudosphere would shape like hyperbola, the surface, curved surface. So, and then I wrote that paper, and Peter also co-authored, and we published in 2007. It was accepted. And we also presented in several conferences, these ideas we presented. And in 2006, I actually wrote my proposal, and I got the funding from Kathmandu University. Went back, and then we started discussing. And in the proposal write-up, I thought that I would do, field work, a little bit of field work, and also do autoethnography, with ethnographic component. I did that, but what happened over the period of time, I thought I would not think that there was that much this component of transformative learning in there in my proposal. Very little. More of cultural studies perspective, more of ethnographic perspective. But over the period of time, I need to be pragmatic, not just, deconstructionist, postmodernist. And then I also read a lot about postmodernism. I found that there are different forms of postmodernism. One is constructivist postmodernism, the other is deconstructive postmodernism. So I felt that in my version of 2003, or in my 2003 version, I was very much deconstructive postmodernist. And I'm a teacher educator, and I need to make a space. So I need to look for alternatives. I can't simply say this is not good or this cannot work, or I should not be just critiquing what is there. I need to engage in the dominant discourse, and I need to look for alternatives. So that's how, again, I came back to Mejiro and Freire. And I came back to Buddha. I came back to Shankaracharya. So it's not just Freire and Mejiro when I was reading in 2002. And I felt that, we need to connect with our culture. So then I sort of started blending these two. And then in 2000, by the end of 2006, when my candidacy was approved, we started running with my supervisor, myself, and colleagues from Africa and other parts of the world, other parts of Asia, like Indonesia. We formed a group called Transformative Education Research Group within Kathmandu University. And we started running seminars every 2 weeks. And I started presenting, other fellow friends also presented. That's how we developed. So, of course, Peter started talking about, transformative learning. Initially, he would talk more about culture studies. But why we need culture studies? Because we work in education. We need a framework. So some helpful framework. I won't say that we need unchanging framework. I would say we need a framework which can help us, improve our school education, our university education, or our teacher education. So we came up with that transformative education, transformative learning, and transformative education research. So in this way, I arrived at transformative learning. I started using transformative learning as one of the major theoretical perspective in my research. And that would go well with Habermas as well, because Habermas would say that the highest form of knowledge that is produced is through critical self-reflection, because that would make people autonomous. That would make people free not in a libertinist perspective, free in terms of knowing our limitations, knowing the systemic limitation, knowing the distortion that happens through us, by us, for us. So one of the powerful tools was or is critical self-reflection. So that came again in my doctoral study, and that came in a prominent way. And also I started reading Eastern philosophies as well. For example, as I said, Buddha. So in Buddhist philosophy, one of the ways is to deconstruct ourselves so that we decenter ourselves and we become, we can expand ourselves. So Vedanta would say the same thing in a different way. We expand ourselves so that we can connect with Brahman. Brahman would be that inclusive space. The emptiness in Buddhism would be that inclusive space. So, and then also the several other authors, the masters and sages from the East and West would refer to that becoming which would be liberated, which would serve more, if not many, if not all, serve many, if not all. So that kind of somewhat ethical, altruistic perspective also led me towards this space of transformative learning.
Right. What I love about that story is just the constant learning and bringing in, you say, okay, I have this idea, and then I discovered something else, and I added this sort of philosophy, and just sort of keep building your knowledge and your philosophy, and using real world connections that you're facing, and then maybe that your sounds like your students are facing, and that's like maybe the next question. You said you're a teacher educator at a Kathmandu University School of Education. Who are your students? So what are they going out and doing in the world? Like what are maybe the barriers that they're facing?
Yeah. When I came back after 2009, and I was very much committed to develop more programs, and then we had masters in maths education, and then we started MPhil, and then one of the goals of our program, they would develop activism. So activism to improve maths class, to improve their teaching. So gradually, what happened with my students, of course, there were a lot of resistance initially. Back in 2010, there were resistance even in my department, in my school. The professors would not agree with the methodology that I would introduce. They would not agree with the pedagogy that I would introduce. They would not agree with the approach that I would take. So it was quite a struggle for about 2-3 years until I became associate professor. Because I was assistant professor, and the plight of the voiceless faculty, and especially in Asian, there's positivistic feudalism. I would say positivistic feudalism, because the hierarchy is so mammoth, and within that hierarchy, they have many of these professors were studied in the West, and they worked under positivistic paradigm, quantitative paradigm, and they imported that knowledge, and unreflectively, they were actually they would position themselves in a hierarchy. But in the meantime, what was happening in Nepal was because of the new regime, this federal system was being developed, and then Republican system, like the monarchy was thrown out, and then this more democratic governance was being practiced. And that actually raised the consciousness of our students as well. So I became very much, I was liked by my students gradually. And with my students who completed university, went to the school, and they worked in public and private system both, they faced difficulties in initial days. They would develop project works, and they would implement restacks inside the mathematics classroom. And there would be a lot of resistance from principal, headmaster, and also fellow colleagues who would not be exposed to these ideas. So that went on, we continued, and then we started MPhil in 2011, and then I went for postdoc for about 6 months in Portugal, thanks to the funding from European Union. And then I came back. We started MPhil again, and that actually developed my sort of horizon. Not just master. MPhil in our part of the world is a bridge between masters and PhD, and we would focus more on research. And then a student started producing research, and they were examined by people in my network outside of Nepal, and that gradually validated my process of becoming a scholar. And in the meantime, I started publishing my publication. Because when I was working in the department in 2009, 10, 11, there were not much publications from my department, because the system they had earlier was not very much publication based. Then we started changing. Students started publishing, and I started co-authoring. I continued my publication and also presentations at the conference. So that actually helped me, establish myself. And then I started influencing policies as well, and that actually gave me the voice. And the methodology is the non-positivistic methodology, ethnography, autoethnography, narrative, phenomenology. They became established methods in the next, when I joined in 2010, that was a distant dream at that time. But after, 3-4 years, because, I persistently help the students to develop proposals. So this way, we develop a ground. And then I started, because once I became associate professor, that gave me the authority to supervise students. Then I started supervising PhD students, and I started producing PhD students. And that also established me. I gained more knowledge about supervision, being pragmatic with people who would come from the other paradigms. So in this way, I started, developing my identity as a teacher, educator, and a scholar. And we also started organizing conferences. And in that, we would invite practitioners. We would invite those who would employ our students, and then they saw our practices, and they started giving us feedback that, oh, your students are pretty good at work. They do all sorts of, they are creative. Initially, some were very resistant about these new forms of pedagogy, but gradually they become very positive. And they became positive. They started contact me if I can send my students to their school, and if I have, math teachers in contact so that I can send to them. And gradually we felt, and then I started working with engineering folks, folks from School of Management, School of Arts, in terms of helping them develop methodology, research projects, so on and so forth. And then what we felt in 2016, 2017, that actually it's not just math teachers. We need to work with whole STEM people. And by then, I have developed around 10, 15 students who completed MPhil degree by 16, 17. I would say not 10, 15. Six students completed MPhil in math education. But there were other areas where I have actually supervised to the completion. So then I felt that, no, it's not just maths. It's science teachers, it's other areas like engineering and whole STEM areas. And we looked into the possible research funding, and then we actually applied to NORAD, and we received one funding, and through a collaboration with Tribhuvan University, another university in Nepal, and also a university in Norway, University of Life Sciences. So then we didn't develop STEAM by then, but as a program, but we developed a research program. We started working in that field. And then we converted our math department into STEAM education department. And this paradigm that you were talking, this transformative paradigm was very much suited to this STEAM, where we include STEM professionals, STEM teachers. Okay? Now I have, I supervised 22 students to the completion. Not these all are not in math education, in different areas of education. And also I have, I would count around 30 to 35 MPhil students I supervised. And now I have 18 students working with me currently in the MPhil level. They have coursework and a little bit of research component, and 8 PhD students in the area, in area of STEAM education. And we have a research site in 28 I would say not 28, 40 kilometers away from my place. We have a public school there, and we have developing STEAM pedagogy through the use of school garden. So my students, they do go to the field, they demonstrate, it's more a participatory, transformative pedagogy they develop in collaboration with the school teachers. So, and then they sort of generate narratives out of their experience of working in that. So in this way, I have been, now I have a team of around 25 to 30 students and faculty. And then we have almost, every other week we have presentations in the research community, and also some of my students are in the US. They are doing PhD. They completed MPhil here. One completed PhD from Norway recently. So, yeah, this is the situation right now in terms of productivity. Yeah, we are keep going. It's not just me. Now I have a team, and the team works, to improve education system. Now there is another impact in the ministry as well. The ministry has introduced integrated curriculum, and I am the subject committee chair of the integrated curriculum. So these are some of the benefits. Now, initially it was difficult to make our message heard, and now it's like we are we tend to be the mainstream, in terms of ideas, in terms of perspective. Of course, in terms of practice, there has to be done a lot, because schools, the pedagogy, the system is very much convincing. But in terms of desire to change among the stakeholder is very high. Although they don't know how, we need to bring them into the system. We need to make them critically reflective. The same process that I went through. Otherwise, transformation cannot be possible by imposing somebody so-called expert. That's not that is not how I develop. I develop. Of course, we need a mentor, but we need to go through the process. So, which is a painful process. It's not that easy process. Critical self-reflection is not easy. I have encountered many difficulties with the students who are not able to reflect critically. They think that if they reflect critically, they will be shamed. They will be ashamed. They feel vulnerable. These are the issues. But anyway, we need, we if we show examples, I think people are able to, educators are able to reflect critically, take courage to change their practice. So that's what I have to say.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like you have, you're connected with students, you're connected with the ministry, just all, from top down. So it looks like we're out of time for the interview. I know we could have chatted a lot of other things. I know you have the journal Transformative Praxis, which we'll put in our show notes as well, and we'll link it for listeners that are interested. But Dr. Bal Chandra Luitel, thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. It was fantastic.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And this concludes our KIX EAP podcast, which is released every first Wednesday of the month. Of course, the opinions expressed on the KIX EAP podcast are solely those of the host and the guest. The KIX EAP podcast is made possible by KIX, which stands for Knowledge and Innovation Exchange. KIX is an initiative of the Global Partnership for Education. Globally, KIX is administered by the International Development Research Center in Canada. NORAG in Geneva hosts one of the 4 regional hubs of KIX. Thanks for listening. Find us on the NORAG or GPE KIX websites. You can subscribe to the KIX EAP podcast, newsletter, and webinar series, and also learn about KIX global or regional projects. Additionally, you can subscribe directly on Spotify or SoundCloud to receive notifications of the new monthly podcast episodes.